Hi everyone. This video shows you how to use Excel to randomly generate results for an experiment. The experiment of interest in this case is whether or not more than 50% of voters in a school district support a school levy. A school levy is how local districts raise monies to support the school district. Alright, to start out, what we need to do is we need to randomly generate the results of each voter. We're going to do that with the rand command on Excel. You have to type this in as a function. So for this case, we're going to go to our cell A1, or A2 rather, and notice what I've done is I've already typed in the columns that I'd like to use, the column titles in Excel. So I'm going to go to A2. I'm going to type in the result of one voter equals rand parenthesis, open and then close parenthesis. If you type equals, that generates a number between 0 and 1. Alright, now what we'd like to do is we'd like to do this for 100 voters. In other words, we're going to randomly select 100 voters, assuming that there's a 50% chance that any voter is going to be for or against the levy. So what I need to do is drag down my Excel file and just keep going down. There you go. Keep going until I get to 100 voters. There we go. And it's 101. We start at 2, so we'll go to 101. That randomly generates 100 voters and their results. Now, we're going to come up with some rule about whether that indicates support or not support. Remember that 50% of my voters support the levy. That's the assumption. So we're going to say if a person supports the levy, then we're going to assume that they have a number, say, between 0 and 0.5. Okay? If they are against the levy, we're going to say they have a number between 0.5 and 1. So what I'm going to do again is introduce a function in Excel, and it is called an IfThen function. And basically what it says is if, we're going to say go to cell B2, we're going to say equals if, and we're going to look at what's happened in cell A2. If the result in cell A2 is less than 0.5, we're going to say that's indicative of support for the levy. If that's the case, we're going to say that the value in this cell is a 1. That says value of true if you see here in Excel. If it's false, if the person is against the levy, I'm going to give them a 0. And if I type enter, or close my parenthesis and just hit enter, notice what it did is it counted. This person had a randomly generated value of 0.019. That is less than 0.5. So they were 1 for the levy. Now, what I'd like to do is count all 100 of these voters very quickly. So what I can do again in Excel is just put my cursor here in the corner, drag down the cells, and I go all the way down to 101, which was my last voter. And there we go. Now notice what's happening. Every time I do something in a cell, the numbers in row A, rather column A, get regenerated. That's going to be helpful because that'll help us quickly generate new samples of 100 voters. Now I'm going to go back up to the top. What I'd like to do in this cell is say, in this randomly generated sample, we've got 100 voters. What proportion of those voters voted for the levy? What proportion voted against? Okay, so for that, what I'm going to do, notice that 1 is for, 0 is against. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to add up the values in column B. So again, another function in Excel, equals, and the sum. Remember, if you had a 1, you were for, 0 is against. So if I count the number of 1s that are before, okay, that will give me the total number of voters that were for the levy. So I'm going to count what is in column B. So if I do parenthesis equals sum, and then parenthesis, and then you can go to this B1 and, oh, sorry, B2 rather, and there we go. Sorry, I'm making a mistake here. Equals, let's go back to cell B2, and if you go cell B2 and then just say column to B101, and that was where our last voter was. Now what that will do is that will count all of the voters that were in that cell. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide that by 100 because there are 100 voters. So if 52% of my voters, or 52 of my voters were for the levy, what I'll get in the cell C2 is I have 52, that is the sum of the ones, divided by 100, or 52%. So press enter, and in this one sample I had 51%. Now in column D, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in the results that were in column C. It's a way for me to keep track of what's going in here. So in cell D1 for trial 1, I have 0.51. In other words, 51% of my voters supported the levy in that trial 1. Now, how do I generate trial 2? I go to my cell A2, which is where my random numbers were generated. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and simply release the values. Okay, so what it did is it randomly generated a new set of values. Let's go back up to the top, and this is my second basically sample of 100 voters. I had a proportion of 0.54 that were for the levy. Now, oh my gosh, look at this. I just discovered something. Every time I enter a new value in column D, it also randomly generates new values. My third simulation, I had 0.42. If I push enter, it generated a new one. Oh, this makes it even faster. Wow, I'm happy here. 0.50, 0.51, 0.39, 0.51, 0.57, and you see what I'm doing is every time I push enter, it randomly generates a new set of 100 values, and this one would be 0.5, and so on. All right, so I can use this tool, this Excel spreadsheet, to randomly generate samples of size 100 very quickly, count the number of individuals that are for or against that school levy, come up with a proportion of those that are for or against, proportion being what percent are for divided by the total, and then quickly keep track of my outcomes. I want to get a few more here. So through this mechanism, you can very quickly generate 25 or 30 or 50 samples. Okay, very quick samples of 100 voters each. Now, the last thing I'd like to do, I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to open up StatCrunch, because what I'd like to do is have a histogram of these results, of these outcomes. So if I go to StatCrunch, I need to go find my data. The data is loaded, and it was in a file. It's on my computer, and I'm going to choose my file, and it was in I saved this file in my Stat204 folder under Homework School Levy Simulation. Here it is. I'm going to scroll down and load the file, and there it is. Notice what I did was have the outcomes of each. So this is what I'd like to, this outcomes of each trial is what I'd like to get a graph of. All right, so for this graph, if I go to, this is quantitative data. They're percentage or proportions of voters in each trial that support the levy. If I go to graph, construct a histogram of the outcomes of each experiment. All right. Then what I can do is go down and just compute. And here is a very quick histogram. Now keep in mind it's not based on a large number of samples, but it's based on, what do we have, about 15 or so. All right. So anyways, that's how you use Excel to generate results for an experiment. Hope you find this helpful and have some fun with the experiment.